If we want to draw, if we're learning to draw, then we need to stop avoiding freehand drawing. Because for most of us, freehand drawing is the only way of drawing that will take us to the place that we actually want to get to. So we need to stop using other methods, even partially, that won't take us to the place we're wanting to go. And by freehand drawing, I mean drawing that's totally done with our hands and with our eyes. Not using mechanical tools such as rulers or dividers, not using devices such as projectors, and not using methods or systems even such as grids or tracing. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using these things. I've used some of them myself many, many times in my art. And they can be very productive and helpful, useful tools for the artist. But if I'm wanting to learn to draw, they're not going to take me to the place I'm trying to get to. But for most of us, if what we want to do is to learn to draw, then we shouldn't use these other methods in order to avoid the risks, the challenges, the fears of drawing freehand. Because if we do, we will also avoid the benefits, the enjoyments, the skills of drawing freehand. Most of which are probably for most of us the main reason we want to draw in the first place. The main reason we're learning to draw in the first place. And not only will grids and projectors and tracings not develop the skills and the habits that I'm after in learning to draw, can actually develop habits that will hinder my ability to learn to draw freehand to my fullest potential and will fight against me developing my natural freehand style. Let me outline some of the things we miss out on when we don't draw freehand. And by freehand, I mean completely freehand. Probably the most important thing that suffers is our observation skills. Because with tracing or using projectors or grids and the like, we don't need them in the same way to the same degree. Because we don't need them, we're not trying to use them and we're not developing them. Because with each of these methods, there's some component of the method that's, if you like, carrying the observation load to some degree or completely. I mean, that's why we're using them. And yet observation is the most important part, I believe, of being able to draw, particularly the sort of freehand drawing that I'm talking about. It's not just having a look at what I'm drawing and then putting the pen on paper. It's working out what the key pieces of visual data I need to record in my mind to be able to transfer onto the paper, onto my drawing accurately, in whichever way I want, the image that I see before me. When our lines end up in the wrong places, it's not normally that we've lacked the technical skill of actually drawing, of actually putting the line where we want it to be. It's far more often that we haven't seen where it really needs to be and how long it really is, or what the angles it has in relation to the other lines around it. And because we haven't learnt to observe the information we need to draw the line accurately, when we put our pen on paper, without realizing it, we're actually guessing a whole lot more than we would have thought. And we don't develop the same eye-hand coordination that we develop when we learn to draw freehand, when we use these aids, these devices, because we don't need to. Again, that's why we're using them, to somehow shortcut the need to develop and refine these skills. We want a more immediate, exact way of achieving the accurate results that we want. We don't develop that link between firstly observing something, but then being able to make that connection with my hand and with the pen and place the line on the paper. It's a skill. It requires practice. It requires work and effort, and we won't get it as correct at the start as we will at the end. But it's a very key, inescapable part of developing our freehand drawing style that we don't get practice at in nearly the same way if we use some of these artificial means to assist the accuracy and the placing of our lines. And we also don't develop the same line drawing skills if we trace and use other projector type devices. Drawing over a line that's already there, whether it's a pencil outline or whether I'm tracing over an image behind my paper on a light box or being projected onto my paper from a projector, will not teach me the skills I need to learn to draw a freehand straight line. And we don't develop the skills that we need and the methodology in drawing that we develop when we bring into being a whole scene with all our lines all at once. These various drawing aids get us to focus on a very particular part at once, whether it's what's inside a particular box in our grid or whether it's the line that we're tracing over. The focus is always on a small part, and we're not thinking of the whole. We're not looking at where this line lies in relation to other lines, and therefore making choices about how it should look, what its weight should be, what its movement should be, whether it should join up with the lines around it or hang loose a little bit. We're not seeing the bigger picture that we need to see to make all of the creative decisions that we would want to make to finish up with a great drawing, and not what will look at best like an accurate, if somewhat lifeless, tracing of a photo. When I don't draw completely freehand, I miss out on that stage in my mind, that creative transformation of the reality I'm seeing in the reference to the line that I end up putting on paper, not just to accurately represent form, but also to create effect, feeling, movement, and the way I connect it, interact it with the other lines that I've already drawn or the lines I intend to draw. Because I'm distracted by that line underneath. I'm distracted by the overwhelming intention to create alignment, exact alignment. And so I end up with a steady, slow line of even weight, drawn at probably a fairly plodding pace. I don't get to experiment with drawing fast or slow lines as might suit the subject or that particular part of my drawing. And this loss of spontaneity in my line drawing can really produce a stiff wooden effect, because there is more to a good line exactness in where it is. And methods of drawing that favour exactness of placement over all other considerations are not great methods to learn to draw with. And most of these methods, most of the time, will encourage an emphasis on line and therefore on outline at the expense of form. At best, we will be creating shapes on our paper rather than developing forms. And combined with a fairly plodding, slow and steady technique of copying over the top of, we can end up with what looks far more like a cartoon effect than a drawing where some sort of creative life has been put into it by the artist. At worst, it can encourage us to divide our lines into the lines we use our various devices to draw and the rest, the outline lines, if you like, versus the not so important lines, the in between the outline lines. And again, at worst, what this can encourage is that when we've completed what we see of as the important lines, the lines that define the shapes of the main objects in our drawing, that we actually stop looking at our reference. We think, oh, it's just leaves now, so I'll just do a leaf pattern here. Or this is just a wall with bricks, I'll just do my brick pattern. Or this is a field of flowers or grass, and I would just do my grass pattern. And so I stop looking at the photo because I don't think there's anything of any importance there to see, because my methodology has encouraged me to see the major outlines as the key things for a successful drawing, instead of every line working together and contributing to the finished whole. We can end up a bit with a colouring in book effect. Strong, obvious outlines that are then filled in various ways with various patterns of lines. And when I avoid freehand drawing, I never experience and benefit from and grow with the natural rhythms and tempos that every artist develops with his line work. For me, it's that sense of going slowly at first as I establish a few key parts of information, a few proportions, a few placements of things that I draw very carefully, that I observe particularly closely, because I'm going to use these to build my scene, my total effect, if you like, by aligning various parts with this and with parts I haven't drawn, as I move on. But as I continue the drawing, the pace picks up, the confidence builds, the ability to place lines accurately more quickly develops, and all of these things affect how my lines look. And then I have deliberate changing manipulation of the lines for various parts of my drawing, where I swap pens or I change the pressure that I apply or the speed with which I draw things with. All of which I've come to learn will create different effects that will work together, I hope, for a successful drawing. And by that, I mean one that creates the effects that I'm after, the things that capture my interest or attention in the reference. This rhythm, this starting and building of pace is, I think, part of the real joy of drawing. And it doesn't happen if I'm plodding along square by square or trying to keep a line exactly over another line as I trace an outline out. I need to get away from the fixation that I'm trying to create a perfect artwork, and I need to develop a drawing style that will eventually give me the skills I need to do that. And when I avoid freehand drawing, I never learn how to deal with my mistakes, both firstly psychologically to not let them worry me, secondly from a more technique-driven point of view, how I can minimize the effect, how I can integrate them into my finished drawing when I can't erase them. I think these are some of the most important skills I've learned, and I don't learn them if I've developed a way of drawing that I don't make any mistakes, where the focus, the priority is on getting every line exact at the very start. And if I make a mistake, I start again, because I'm using methods so that I won't make mistakes. If we're really worried about making mistakes in our drawing, it probably indicates we have this sort of personality where we need to force ourselves to make mistakes and learn to deal with them, because they've certainly become a thing that I no longer fear. And very occasionally, I do make a bit of a blunder, I get a proportion wrong, and I do start that drawing again. And when I start it again, I use what I've learned in that, if you like, false start to make sure I capture what I'm trying to capture, the proportions, the lines, whatever, more the way I was wanting to in the first place. And it always happens. It's always easier the second time, because I've learned. I learned some things about this very specific drawing in that drawing that didn't work out, and now I use those, and usually I nail it second time round. Learning to cope with making mistakes is a part of life, but particularly a part of drawing. And in freehand drawing, we get the experience that we need by necessity to learn both that it can be done and then how to do it. I often get a comment that people's favorite parts of my videos are where I point out mistakes when I make them, because they love seeing how much it doesn't matter by the end. They find that very encouraging. When I avoid drawing freehand in ink, I never learn the freedom it is to not have to worry about having an eraser on hand, on not having to try to work out whether a line is good enough or not good enough to leave or to erase. I never need to try and rewind my drawing to an earlier, more perfect stage. I'm never having to make judgments about, do I go on or was it better before? I get to save all the time, and probably more significantly, the mental energy, even the trauma of trying to work all of that out. Because once a line's on the paper, the only decision is, how do I push on with the next line? If this angle is not quite right, well, I draw another line over the top at the correct angle, so that our brain, when we see this, will favor the right line and won't notice the other line. Or can I actually bring some tonal value up against this, or some cross-hatching to minimize the effect? And again, I don't experience that usually by the end, it really doesn't matter in the way I thought it did at the time. And when I avoid learning to draw freehand, I never get to experience the wonderful mobility that drawing can have. That sense of having a sketchbook and a pen, walking down the street, sitting on top of a mountain, sitting in the corner of a busy cafe or in a train, and drawing what's around me, because it's just too hard to organize without rulers or, well, tracing or projectors or draw up grids. It's a great experience. It's a great product. It's a great gift that we receive through learning to draw. the ability to go anywhere and to record in some way something that excites us about a scene. I can look at drawings I did in Paris 5 years ago, and because I was in the one spot with a lot of observational attention, I can remember so much more from those locations and those times. I can smell the food stalls. I can hear the buskers still. I know what insects were annoying me as I stood there on that corner of the bridge and drew Notre Dame. When we develop our freehand drawing skills, all of these joys of drawing are ours. Please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using grids or tracing or using projectors. As I said, I've used them myself, and they can be very helpful and valid and useful ways in developing artworks that we're wanting to do. But if I'm wanting to learn to draw freehand, if that's ultimately what I want to be able to do, to grab a pen, to sit in front of something and to sketch it out, using these methods is not a shortcut to get there. It's not a way to learn some things more easily, and then when I get better, I'll do it freehand completely. They're actually not developing the skills I need right from the observational skills to be able to draw freehand. And because they'll be developing ways of thinking and drawing that aren't connected with freehand drawing, I'll be developing habits that I will probably have to work against if I later get round to trying to develop freehand drawing skills. I need to overcome my fear of making mistakes because, let's face it, most of the time, most of us use these methods of drawing is because we want the drawing to look right. We don't want to make mistakes. And it's that fear of making mistakes that has us holding back from developing a truly freehand drawing experience and style. We have to get over these fears if we want to learn to draw freestyle. We have to get over these fears if we want to learn to draw freehand. We have to realize we don't need to be perfect in every line. We have to realize that mistakes are part of the learning process and we should embrace them and learn from them and move through them. We have to realize we will improve. We have to realize mistakes don't matter by the end of the drawing nearly the way they feel like they matter when we make them. And we need to realize that all of this is true because we're not producing an artwork when we draw. We're learning to draw. We need to tolerate lines that aren't quite right in the same way a pianist would tolerate hitting the wrong keys, or the way a singer would tolerate not quite hitting the notes they were trying to hit at times. Let me put on my old man hat for a moment and tell you 2 things I've learned in my life. Well, 2 things that I think are relevant to this video. The first is that fear is never a good reason to base a decision on. So if my reason for not embracing the full freehand drawing experience is fear of making mistakes, then that's a better reason than most to embrace it straight away and to push through it and to learn that these sorts of fears are best tackled head on before they grow any larger. My second bit of old man wisdom is that perfection is a very unsatisfying goal to aim for. Now, I've got nothing against high standards. I hope from my artwork you can see that I have high standards and that I do push myself. But the end result is not a perfect drawing. It's an expression of my creativity. And I think part of the reason of freehand drawing for me is more satisfying than some of the far more complicated drawings I've done, say, for Instagram using a grid, is that they purely come from my creativity. There's no, if you like, external framework which has helped them along. So if you've been putting off drawing completely freehand, but it's still the thing that deep down you know you really want to be able to do, I hope I've encouraged you to give it a go, because there is no shortcut. There is no easing into it gently approach we can take. The only way to learn to do a thing is to do it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I'm starting to wish that I'd brought a drawing book down here as well as my notes. And right now at the end, the lights become really nice for filming down here. So I'm really glad you get to see what I'm privileged to enjoy. So why not give 100% totally freehand drawing a go? But honestly, whatever you're drawing, however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Let me just give you a 360 of this beautiful location on this beautiful, crisp Australian East Coast autumn afternoon.